Welcome to another episode of the D-Noise podcast, where we, the Blender heads at CG Cookie, get together to discuss all things related to computer graphics and, of course, our favourite open source software, Blender. My name is Wayne Dixon, I'm one of the instructors here at CG Cookie, and today I'll be hosting this chat with some of our fellow instructors, Kent Trammell and Jonathan Lampel, about the topic of creativity. So if you're interested in some of the ways to fuel your own creativity, or even just to find out how we fuel ours, then this is the episode for you. We even have some advice on how to get yourself out of a creative rut, so to speak. Spoiler alert, all you need to do is stare people in the face and point out the weird creases. Just make sure you tell them Kent told you to do it. So without further ado, let's get creative. I want to start with Jonathan Lampel. Do you have anything that you do on a regular basis to fuel your creativity, either in like creating tutorials as we do, or just your general creativity of projects that aren't tutorial based, like as in producing tutorials, the stuff that you want to make?
Not really. In the last several years, I don't actually have any set habits that I do every single day or every week that are specific to that. I find most of my inspiration comes from outside sources, from things that are not really related to computer graphics specifically. I've often wondered if I should have a creative habit that I do regularly, and that's part of why I'm interested in this conversation.
I think it's important, and I think all of us will probably say the same thing. You need to find areas of inspiration from outside of what you do. So what are the activities that you do where you find that internal creativity?
Definitely anything outdoorsy. I live in a space that's perfect for going out hiking and rafting and just anything outdoors. So that's a big inspiration for me.
Living in America would be good because you have less animals that want to kill you.
Except for Florida. Stay away from there. But if you come up to the other side of the United States.
All right, so you're on the west coast of the United States. It's got less dangerous animals and less Florida mans.
True. Though I've heard that danger does inspire creativity.
So when you're running away from an alligator, are you like, oh, I just got this great idea for for creating a rocket ship, like in 3D?
Okay, maybe not. It was a bit of a stretch.
I like that you meant literally outside 3D, like outdoors 3D. Life has gotten a lot more interesting for me in the boring bits, you could say, because if I'm driving and a car's in front of me, I start to analyze the shape of the complex hard surface curvature, right? And I'll start to file these little things away, like, oh, that particular car is pretty interesting. So if I'm ever going, not if I'm going to, but when I create a robot and just can't resist the urge to make a hard surface robot, I'll have a reference. I'll remember cars, or that specific car is an interesting inspiration for complex curvature.
So you're always analyzing things for modeling and whatever, and there's no off switch. Is that what you're saying?
There is an off switch, so it's not like an oppressive Neo seeing the Matrix, like I can't turn it off, but it's a natural place my brain goes to if, I'm talking to someone and I'm losing interest in the conversation. All of a sudden, the way their face deforms when they talk becomes very interesting, and I start to make mental notes about, when they open their mouth and their little earlobes go inward, like little tiny things. When I'm driving and it's boring, rather than listening to Toy Story on repeat for the 100th time that my kids are watching, I naturally start to look at how the sunlight interacts with the clouds. So I can imagine someone hearing this and saying, geez, what if I don't want to see the world all the time that way? It's not oppressive. It's very fun and effortless. I can't help but enjoy that.
Getting into that, like that mode of thinking, was it a skill that you had to practice or train, or was it something that you just had a light bulb moment and you go, oh, hang on, that is an interesting thing to look at, and then you looked at it in more detail and you go, that dude's got a weird crease on his face. How is that moving when he's talking?
One of the first times that it clicked for me that what we're doing in the computer is happening in real time all around us at every moment is when I realized snow had blue shadows. That was a big moment for me, and thinking like, oh, that's how it looks in the art that I like too. Like you exaggerate the blueness of the shadows because it really is blue in real life. I think especially lighting and materials clicked for me and drew that immediate connection to how reflections work in reality, how dirt and grime gather, how edges are, worn away. That stuff is all around us, and it's for free, right? I don't have to go searching for it, but that over time, you're either outside most days or you're running errands most days. And so you're getting this kind of perpetual inspiration that has come into play in my projects way more often than I planned it would.
I guess what you're saying is you need to know how to look at things, just looking at things a different way.
It does feel like a certain set of lenses, right? Like I put them on and I do see the world through my CG knowledge. You have to know a little bit about materials and roughness versus reflectivity, and you can see how those play out in reality.
I kind of do a similar thing with the way people move. Like, you know who people are, not by looking at their face or their clothes, or it's the way they move. You're like, oh, that person has a funny gait when they walk, or they favor their left side. When I was at animation school and like really in the depth of animation, thinking about animation every day and every minute of every day, I was walking down the street with my wife and I'm like flopping my arms, like I'm leading with my elbows like a cartoon. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, just practicing.
I'll be honest, I did that while I was walking to the store the other day. I was just a little bit bored and I wasn't listening to anything. And so I just tried to walk as if I was badly animated, and it was great. It was fun.
Okay, we've seen materials, we've seen how to model things, we've seen the way that people move in the real world. Is there anything else that we're missing that people can kind of look at differently in their everyday life?
I mean, I think it's just everything. There's an endless possibility of things to look at and analyze, whether it's how dirt's distributed and how you can maybe think about that in terms of how to make it in a particle system or whatever. It's just endlessly interesting. And I think I've heard this from almost everybody who gets excited about CG for the first time and starts learning Blender. They just really start to look at things differently and look at things more carefully. And it's almost a joke of pointing out Blender terms, but in real life. I think it happens to everybody just because it's something that grabs you.
One of my favorite side quests when it comes to reality is clouds, and how so often, if it were a CG render, I would critique them and say, that looks fake. That looks like a card. I don't know if you ever noticed, look at the clouds next time, but there's often this like blue outline that I can't make sense of. It looks like a bad matte edge. That is weird to me that clouds do that, but hey, that's reality.
There's a lot of things that happen in the real world that you're like, if you animated that, you get the note back. You're like, do it again.
Yeah, there's this bush on the one street over where all of the leaves face almost exactly outwards from the branches, and it just doesn't look real.
And you think, so they need to change their random seed.
Precisely.
I want to talk about other things like other people's art. Personally, what I like to do if I see some really awesomely animated clip is you can take a snippet of that and do draw-overs and study the frame. You can frame by frame it and go, look at this smear. Look what they've done here. Oh, it's only 2 frames from here to there, which is why it feels so much like an accent, like, and you can do little draw-overs on it and to give yourself notes. And that's not to copy that, but it's kind of like what Kent said earlier, where you're making mental notes for yourself and you're absorbing that. Is there stuff like that that you guys do? Maybe we'll start with Kent.
Yes. I would call like the reality stuff for free. It's the effortless things that's just around me naturally. It's just up to me to tap into it if I want. But the more intentional gathering of inspiration, I do have some habits and some certain places that I go to regularly. I would say ArtStation is a place I go to if I want to see the best CG art made by CG artists for other CG artists in a way. You know, it's a bunch of characters, it's a bunch of warriors and superheroes and extreme poses and environments and hard surface models. Stuff that's very interesting to me, but probably not interesting to the vast majority of the world, if we're honest. Pinterest is maybe one of my favorites because I think Pinterest has the ability of gathering high quality images that are also generally accepted as appealing. I find that useful, like with sessions, you know, me getting into that. Part of the goal is to create things that are more widely appealing. And I don't necessarily trust myself to know it's widely appealing, but, you know, a little bit of guidance from Pinterest is kind of how I consider that. And then I also follow specific artists on Twitter. That's the only real social media platform I engage with regularly. So that's for certain artists and seeing their specific stuff roll in regularly.
What about you, Jonathan? Do you have any go-to things like Pinterest, ArtStation, anything where you gather studies?
I'd say really the only 2 places that I regularly peruse are just Twitter and YouTube, which is pretty basic.
Do you guys have, because I do this and I often forget about it, but I have a swipe folder where you download all of this inspiration stuff. So if you find something cool on YouTube, you download it and you put it in your folder. And then you go back to it whenever you remember, which is for me is not very often. So whenever you're feeling down or whatever, you're like, oh, I need inspiration. You can open it up and you go, oh, that's right. There was this really cool thing that I forgot that I loved for some reason.
I used to do things that way in the earlier days, but then I discovered Pinterest and that took over.
Maybe that's what I should do. Maybe I should convert that to a cloud version. The only thing I'm wary about is with the cloud stuff, and if you're linking things in here, there's no guarantee that someone's going to stay on Twitter or that post is going to stay. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I liked to swipe it. So I've got it and it's there and I'm in control of, if I no longer want to watch this anymore or I don't want to see this anymore, I can delete it. Plus, I don't need an internet connection. I don't get distracted, which could be another thing that we can talk about, distraction against creativity.
That's a good point. I saw Pinterest as typically it does have a link back to where it came from, but that doesn't fix if that's removed from Twitter or if it's removed from the source. That is a problem. I wonder what happens on Pinterest. I feel like I've seen it. If the source is removed, it still keeps the Pinterest side of it. And usually it has like a little caption of where it came from, perhaps. Whereas if I saved it locally back in the day, that was before I really had a mind of, I want to credit people that inspire me. I think that's going to become even more important in the age of AI.
You can still totally credit people. Like if you're on social media or whatever, and if someone posted an amazing image, you can repost it. I'm not saying don't do that.
I just mean if you save the file, you need to keep that in the file name or else I lose the connection to where that came from, basically.
Yeah, good point. I see what you're saying.
Interesting to me that, Jonathan, you don't have any habits in the traditional art sense, like you go to certain websites, because you create beautiful stuff.
Thanks. I mean, I do appreciate that. I feel like I would be a more creative artist if I did those types of things, but so far it hasn't drawn me enough for me to fall into it. And so after a while, I just sort of decided not to worry about it.
Not to worry about it. That could be a key to a lot of things in life. It doesn't sound like anyone else had creative habits where they did every day, whereas I did. So some things that I did every day: meditation, I used to do drawing, I used to learn a foreign language, and I used to practice some mathematics. They were all creatively based, but they were all to kind of fuel different aspects of my mind and keep it actually learning and seeing things differently. So some of those things I can't do every day because my life circumstances have changed, and I have a kid now who I have to fight with every morning. I got to wrangle him to school, then I got to do work, and then I got to pick him up, and it's like, oh my God, how is there any time left to do these things? But I want to talk about one of those things, which is meditation. Have you guys got into any of that before?
I've never done meditation, but I'm very interested in it.
Jonathan, you said that you did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you meditate regularly or?
Not at the moment. I think mostly while I was in college, and a little bit afterwards, I went to a class just because I thought it was interesting and I found it extremely relaxing and refreshing. And so then I kept with it for a while.
You don't ebb and flow with your coming back to it and then dropping off, or it's just gone from your life now?
It comes and goes in waves. Definitely. Yeah.
Because one thing that I kind of do, which is meditative, it's not actually meditation, is I do swimming. So doing physical exercise is actually good for your brain. And I like swimming because it's very repetitive and I'm in the water. I'm trying to be present with every stroke. So I'm doing it good, and I'm training my breathing to stay regular so I don't die under the water. It's life and death.
I go to the gym a few times a week in the mornings. That's been quite good, but it's not, each exercise isn't quite as long as swimming for, I forgot how many laps you said you did the other day, but you were swimming for a good while.
Swim for 40 laps is a good day.
Like in a row?
Yeah, 40 straight. That's what I train myself to do. I practice a type of swimming which is called total immersion swimming, which is all about efficiency and not wasting energy and gliding in the pool. But it's also about being present with every stroke. It's very meditative.
So meditative, how does that inform your creativity? I bet it does.
Well, I think it's about focus. One thing I find that's happened in our society over the last 10 years is people's attention spans have dropped. I used to be able to sit for hours and be focused on a thing. And now if I get 1 minute into something without being distracted, I'm like, yes, I made it 1 minute. And I think that's because of outside social media. Everything is bombarding us, and it's trained our brains to have very short attention spans. So by practicing, like focusing on one thing, you're actually building your resilience to stay focused on a task. One thing that I like about doing creative work is getting into the flow state. It's just like when you just kind of look up and you go like, oh my God, I've been working for an hour. I wasn't aware of time passing or anything. I've just really enjoyed working on that, just going from one beat to the next, just doing stuff and moving forward. I think meditation or exercise or being present is kind of all of what these things are. Help us with our focus to do that, to get into that flow state. Do you guys struggle to get into flow state?
I found myself sometimes getting into it when doing coursework, recording, but that's very rare. It's usually more either a personal project that I get sucked into, or I found myself working on some plugins recently that I've fallen into that, or I think I'm just going to work on it for 30 minutes and then I look up and it's been like 3 hours.
Is that fun when that happens though? Are you in flow state or are you just working?
It's a little bit of both. It's fun and also I'm banging my head against the wall. I mean, I feel like that's kind of the essence of programming from my perspective.
So you're doing coding to kind of fuel that pushing of the barriers of your own mind?
Definitely. And it's extremely satisfying once I actually push through and make something work.
You might need to define flow state. I'm pretty sure it's like the sweet spot of working creativity in action.
Everything else drops away and you're kind of not aware. It feels like everything's happening automatically.
I don't think I have too much trouble getting into that. Very similar to Jonathan. A lot of times it's R&D for a course, which is a more freeing time to create. I'm trying to figure out an interesting project, make mental notes of tips and tricks or valuable educational bits to share along the way. With sessions, especially like a variety of different projects being on a quick pace, there was a couple days during R&D where I did 3 of them in a day. And that, like, the day is gone when you blink, but you have all this fun stuff at the end of the day. And those are my favorite creative days for sure.
It sounds like both of you guys can get into flow state whilst you're recording tutorials.
Not while I'm recording. Beforehand, I think the same as Kent, where it's when I'm exploring different topics or trying things out for the first time.
Because Paul Kikeji and I were talking about this the other day. It's where you're just tinkering. You don't feel shackled by having to record something. You're just doing it and you don't have to explain everything and you don't have to slow down to explain it as you're doing it. You're like, I'm doing this, I'm going forward. So it's good to hear that you guys struggle to get into flow state while you're recording.
I have lost track of time, but not for the reason of flow state.
Oh, of course, because you're recording, you go, oh, this tutorial, it's a 10-minute task. It's going to take me 10 minutes to record it. And then you look at your recording and you're like, oh my God, 1 hour and 12 minutes. You're like, do I bother editing this? Or do I just do it again now that I know how many different 1,000 mistakes I've made along the way? So if I just did it again, I could do it in 15 minutes and then I'm going to edit that down to the right amount.
When it comes to creativity, do you guys find it difficult to leave your comfort zone and expand your creativity? Are you welcoming of those things? Or do you find your comfort zone just too comfortable to leave?
I think a good thing would be to practice being uncomfortable. We're doing the trailer for the animation bootcamp, like a cinematic trailer, which is basically a mini short. I had to sit down and task myself with the job of trying to make the fundamentals of animation look sexy. People they see animation and they're like, I want to do animation because that looks beautiful. But then it's like, oh, you need to practice. It's like learning an instrument. It's like, I got to practice the scales. And that's what the animation bootcamp is. It's like practicing your scales and learning to see these things and learning to see the movement of stuff. And I just sat down and I'm like, right, for the next hour and a half, whatever it is, I'm going to write 6 ideas. And then I got to the 4th one and I was just like, oh no, I'm stopping at this one because this is the winner. I knew it in my bones. I'm like, this is the one. But I did sit there for a while and force myself to, okay, that idea is kind of there. Let's do the next idea. I've got nothing. And then I found the longer you sit there and you force yourself to be uncomfortable, it comes.
That's a pretty good discipline to develop. I struggle with multiple ideas on the same thing.
It wasn't about getting 6 ideas. It was about, okay, how do I think around this problem? I had to get into the right frame of mind of throw out ideas, work with them for a little bit, and then let them go. And it's okay to kill your ideas. And I should have remembered this from a long time ago because when you do animation, you can get attached to the stuff you create. And you're like, I worked for a week on this. This is brilliant. And then you show the director, the client or whatever, and they're like, no, can you change this? And you're like, but this is beautiful. But it's not your work. Do you know what I mean? You're producing something for other people and you get used to not being attached to your work. It's like, I made this and then I've got to be ready to throw it away when they go, I hate it.
You described the process as solving a problem. To what extent do you guys think that creativity and problem solving are similar? Are they exactly the same, or are they a little bit different?
I would say they're exactly the same. In a project, right? Stuff comes up all the time and it doesn't work the way that you need it to work. For example, Kent and I worked on a project where you get a character. Here's the character design. Oh, do they need to walk? Do they need to do this? No, they're just a rabbit, and they're just going to be bouncing around being a rabbit the whole time. And then we get 3 projects in, and then all of a sudden, that character is doing stuff that the rabbit wasn't designed to do. Like turn over and look at his hands, and the hands are different because it was a point of view shot of the rabbit looking at his hands, and his hands can't flip over and he can't look at his palms. So we just made some arms that could do that, and that solved the problem.
When you were talking about your iterative ideas and being okay throwing them away, I don't mean to keep going back to sessions, but it is what I'm living and breathing lately. But what was new for me in that is it involved a lot of ideas to quickly go through. And I found myself okay when one was finished and I maybe had enough satisfaction in the moment. But then coming back to it, I was like, no, that's not good enough to make it into the final course. And that I considered a growth moment for me, because I typically don't like to invest any time in something that's not going to be final and be something that I'm really happy with.
You might see that as a failure. It's not a failure because it was a growth moment and it was a learning moment. You learned something from that and you're going to apply it to the next one. You can only be as good as you are right now. You're going to make something and then you're going to come back in a week and you're going to look at it and you're going to hate it. And if you do, that's actually a good thing. It means that you have grown as an artist, your eye has developed, and your skills are progressing.
That's exactly where I was going with it.
But also, other people need to look at it as well, because you are often more critical of your own work than other people are. So I know that I create stuff and I hate it. Through my eyes, I'm seeing it as it's not as good as I wanted it to be, therefore it is bad. But for other people, they would look at it and go, that is really great. Like, you've done a really great job. And just because I know that I could have done better doesn't mean that what I've created isn't good. Yes, maybe this isn't as good as you can do because you've grown, but also give yourself a little bit of a break every now and then and be kinder to yourself.
What would have helped me back in my early days is that sort of mentality. It can seem like computer graphics is going to take forever to learn at the level you want to do it. It's a massive journey, and that can be true. That can be part of the big reward. But remembering that you are progressing with each project, despite if it's as good as you wanted it, that would have helped my mentality back then for sure. It would lead to lulls in me thinking like I'm never going to be good enough to do what is in my head.
So you're never going to be good enough to do what's in your head. What we're talking about now is practicing your creativity, practicing your craft. Is there anything that you guys can think of that people listening can do to practice what they're learning?
I mean, I don't think there's anything that I can think of beyond practicing. I'm struggling to come up with anything else. Whereas if they want to get better at modeling, it's practicing modeling. I don't see it as something that there's a secret behind. Or if there is, I'd really like to know it.
I agree. It's not, to use your word, a sexy answer. But if I had a better mentality when I was early on, and practicing was so important, rather than looking at each head that I sculpted and it just didn't look quite right. In hindsight, I realized each time I did the ear, it got a little better. There's no way you can practice and it gets worse. So it is getting better. And eventually, I would get past the disappointment enough to try again. And it's inevitable that the more you try, the better it's going to end up each time. And so yeah, I guess focusing on the little things that you do learn, that you do get a little bit better, being honest with yourself in the moment to say, hey, that is actually better than the last time you did it. The whole head might not be what you want, but the nostril, that looks better.
So now I want to talk about the creativity pre-kids versus post-kids. And I know Kent and myself, we're two instructors in this conversation that have had kids, and Jonathan Lampel hasn't, and that's fine. Like, I'm not picking on you, not saying that you should do it because it's hard. It's really, really hard. But I wanted to talk about the creativity changes. Like, you did mention it a little bit earlier.
Wow, yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you circled back around to this because I wanted to ask you a question about this exact thing. So pre-kids, I still had time to do personal projects, right? I would go to work modeling at a studio all day and then come home and spend a couple hours that night working on a character that I had in mind. That was very common, especially in the earlier years of the career. Kids come around and that that time evaporates and you wonder how you ever had time before that. But what I have appreciated about having kids is that I start to see them appreciate life in a similar way as me. Like my kids like to draw, and to see them formulate shapes from their limited perspective. I've spent so many years trying to get better and better at creating like authentic, realistic, proportioned shapes. And to go back to see them in a rudimentary sense has made me kind of appreciate the abstraction of like shape perception. And it's also made me have this nostalgia wave that has made me go back to when I was a kid and appreciate those things again. So certain video games that I liked as a kid, I'm now like, my son and I just watched through Ocarina of Time, a playthrough on YouTube, and he geeked out about it. And so now I geek out about it. And I kind of realized that there's a lot of things in my childhood that made me become who I am today. Like I love character art because of these toy figurines I had back in the day. And so since having kids over the years, I've started gathering some of my old toys that my parents kept around the house, and they're now on my shelf up here, just as a reminder of they weren't just silly, stupid toys for when I was a kid. Like there's a reason this toy is here and not some of my other ones, because the shape of the legs always stuck with me. And that is now influencing the shape of my character's legs, or this color, coordination of the outfit has always stuck with me. So that's been something I did not expect with kids, being able to feed off the nostalgia and reappreciate, what I had missed.
I would kind of say the similar thing with the time aspect, as you mentioned. Like you have a lot less time now to get the things that you need actually done. And my wife is a teacher, and she's constantly interrupted. My whole day is being interrupted. So you just get better at doing the stuff in limited amount of time. You get faster. And I guess that's practice. Like anything that you practice, you get better at. I feel like I'm still not there yet. And often I can't do the things that I need to get done at the time that I have available to do them. Also with the nostalgia thing, I think, yes, the nostalgia of seeing the world through a young person's eyes and seeing how they connect things and they're not tainted or jaded by the stress of life as they're older is such a beautiful thing. Like in the words that they invent, it's beautiful. My son looked at the sun setting and he goes, "Look, Dad, it's boomerizing. The sun is boomerizing." And you're like, that is an excellent way to describe it. It's a reminder of like, when you're not shackled with the rules of life, how creativity can just escape. Like that's what his mind sees it as, and it comes out that way. So Jonathan, you've started your CG cookie career without kids. You still don't have kids. How has it changed for you, your creativity levels? Have you noticed anything in that time?
It's definitely changed. I feel like just general life will throw different things at you that change how you see the world. I can relate only somewhat to the kids thing. Both of my sisters both have kids, and so I have a good number of nieces and nephews that are always really fun and are now getting into video games and drawing pictures that are less abstract, and I can enjoy things through their eyes that way.
Maybe some people are struggling out there with their creativity. Maybe they're in a rut. Is there anything that we can inspire them with or help them maybe get them out of their rut? Anything that you can think of, Kent?
That is precisely what I was hoping to do with sessions, is to give people a variety of low investment projects to explore what they might not have known they were interested in. And then hopefully it will train you to extend your boundaries. I think a lot of people, myself included, can get very comfortable in a certain type of creative expression. And if you're struggling, I guess the struggle implies that you want to be creating things. You just don't know what to create. Inevitably for me, the things that inspired me, Halo 2 was a big inspiration for me back in the day. The Matrix visual effects were a big inspiration to me. Lord of the Rings behind the scenes was a huge inspiration to me. Inevitably, if I keep watching films, if I keep watching shows with beautiful visuals, something is going to capture me and I will want to create it.
If inspiration is a challenge, I wouldn't discount getting out there and just doing things that you enjoy anyway. And then you'll inevitably just find something about that you think is interesting. One recent example for me is a place that I didn't expect to start enjoying CG again is concerts, where I like going to concerts. I go to quite a few, but they always have these visuals that are always really interesting, and they're always super fast paced. They're always usually not that high budget. And so it's stuff that you look at and you're like, oh, I could probably make that fairly quickly. There's so many things like that just out there, just doing the things that you love doing anyway, that you'll notice things that are just fun and that make you want to do that yourself.
Or just try and go in the world and say, I feel like you're beautiful if I just look at you a certain way, and you'll start to be inspired without much effort.
I found recently that I feel like I've come out of a funk, and it gets back to one of the things that we said earlier, which is don't worry about it. The thing that's inspired me about creating what I'm doing next for CG Cookie is this cinematic trailer thing. I was trying to think about how would I approach this as that younger animator. Like for me 10 years ago, how would I approach this? What ideas would I come up with 10 years ago, which would scare the hell out of me now? Because I go, how hard is that to do? I'm not worried about that. I'm just like, let's just get this done. I could do this. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, you said that in the pitch even. Like, I don't know how we're going to do the rolling smush thing, but I'll figure it out. And you will. You will.
Well, I feel like this is a nice spot to kind of end our discussion. I've certainly learned a lot about your creative habits and things that you do. I'm going to be watching people's faces as they talk, and people are going to think I'm weird. Like, why are you looking at my face? It's like Kent Trammell told me to. And I'm also going to go bushwalking to try and not get eaten by any drop bears. So thank you very much for joining me. And hopefully everyone out there feels more creative for having listened. So that's it for our chat today. Thank you a bunch for listening to us. We hope this conversation helped spark a renewed sense of creativity for you, or at the very least, you just enjoyed hanging out with us. If you're interested in leveling up your skills in Blender and supporting what we do, check out our extensive library of courses over at cgcookie.com. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you'll be so kind as to give us a review on your podcast player, that will be greatly appreciated. All the links are in the description, but we'll see you in the next episode of the Denoise Podcast.